All right, hello there, thrill seekers. I am back. I took a couple of weeks off because my nephew was out visiting and there were holidays, and I went and did stuff, but now I'm back. And I'm going to start doing videos weekly, but I don't know if I'm going to do as many as I've been doing in the past because I'm also working on a new podcast, so get excited about that. I hope I'll have the first episode ready by the end of this week. We will see. So look forward to that. And at the advice of my nephew, with whom I had extensive discussions about internet stuff, and he's very internet savvy, I'm moving the musical intros to musical outros. They're going to be at the end of the videos now instead of at the beginning, because he was saying people would be tuning in to see Buddhist content and then they'd see an old guy playing guitar and they wouldn't know what that was all about and they wouldn't watch. So I'm going to move those to the end. Okay, so without further ado, here comes the Buddhism. I put a quote the other day on Twitter from one of my favorite books, I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. I found this when I was traveling on one of my vacation days. This is an actual printed in India copy of I Am That, which I thought was kind of cool. And here is the quote that I put up on the internet. Now, this isn't Buddhism because Nisargadatta Maharaj was Hindu and not Buddhist, but I find that he has a lot of affinity with Buddhism. And here's what he says. When you deceive yourself that you work for the good of all, it makes matters worse, for you should not be guided by your own ideas of what is good for others. A man who claims to know what is good for others is dangerous. And the questioner asks, how is one to work then? Nisargadatta Maharaj answers, neither for yourself nor for others, but for the work's own sake. A thing worth doing is for its own purpose and meaning. Make nothing a means to something else. Bind not. God does not create one thing to serve another. Each is made for its own sake. Because it is made for itself, it does not interfere. You are using things and people for purposes alien to them, and you play havoc with the world and yourself. And I find this is interesting because, to me, it seems like kind of another way of stating the same kind of things that Dogen says in his essay Canon, and Canon is the bodhisattva of compassion. And when asked to define compassion, Dogen says it's like a hand reaching for a pillow in the middle of the night, a hand groping for a pillow in the middle of the night. So a hand groping for a pillow in the middle of the night is an action done completely unconsciously. You're asleep. You don't know what you're doing. And you're not doing it for any purpose other than the action itself. So real compassionate action isn't done with an idea of I am helping others. It's done for the sake of just doing it. It spontaneously sees or understands what needs to be done and does it. Now, when I put that quote, a shorter version of that quote, on Twitter, somebody objected and immediately jumped to the Hitler argument, which is to say that there are obviously times when we know what needs to be done for the good of all. For example, Hitler in World War II. And I hate the Hitler argument. Everybody hates the Hitler argument, I think. And one of the reasons I think the Hitler argument is so bad is you can't argue. Anytime you try to say anything about Hitler, you can't say anything about Hitler without getting into trouble. It's like when Kanye West said, what did he say? He said something about Hitler had redeeming qualities. Now, when I first heard that quote, and I heard it kind of I didn't actually see him making the statement on video or anything. Somebody kind of told it to me. And I thought, maybe it's some nuanced argument that was kind of twisted around by the internet. Maybe he's making some kind of deeply Christian argument, like everyone has redeeming qualities, even Adolf Hitler. Well, it turns out it wasn't. It was just Kanye West going crazy and becoming kind of a weird neo-Nazi or something, But it got me thinking about some of the things I'd been reading in this book, which I haven't quite finished. It is called Emptiness and Omnipresence by Brooke A. Zipporin. Zipporin? I'm not sure how you pronounce that name. And I kind of like this book, and I'm going to write to Professor Zipporin one of these days, because this is the first Buddhist book I've seen other than one of mine that invokes Johnny Rotten in the book. So I wonder if we have some affinity, and we were born the same year, I find. So maybe that's it. But the reason I got interested in this book is it's about Tendai Buddhism, and I don't know much about Tendai Buddhism except that Dogen, before he became a student of Zen Buddhism, was a student of Tendai Buddhism. And one of the interesting and controversial aspects of Tendai Buddhism is its way of addressing the problem of evil. Because, well, let me read you a couple of things that Professor Ziporin has to say about evil as it is addressed in Tendai Buddhism. Because in a kind of weird way, in Tendai Buddhism, evil can be good. Let's read. The section in question that I want to read is called Ineradicable, oh boy, that's one of those philosophy words, evil. Enlightenment as transformative inclusion of rather than replacement of evil. Even if we can, with some strain, begin to see the logic of this position already, it may be harder to swallow the corollary. Evil is ineradicable, omnipresent, I don't know what that word means, I'm sorry, and an essential element of Buddhahood. Evil is an essential element of Buddhahood. That's what I'm taking away from that. In a way, this should come as no surprise to students of Buddhism, because in Buddhist psychology and ethics, evil and suffering are inextricably linked. Evil in Buddhism is simply defined as unskillful action that leads to suffering for oneself, for others, or for both. In its root Buddhist sense, evil means nothing more than whatever causes suffering. In the framework of the Buddhist doctrine of causality, deeds have consequences, either observable negative events that are said to be brought about through unseen workings of karma by unwholesome thoughts and deeds, or more directly observable and perhaps more relevant to our concerns here, by unpleasant psychological results that are concomitant to mental dispositions of greed, anger, and delusion. Suffering is the result of evil, that is, of unskillful action, of misconceived attempts to attain happiness and avoid suffering. Evil and suffering are two ends of the same process. Evil is the beginning of suffering. Suffering is the end of evil. So if Buddhahood inherently includes suffering, it must in some sense inherently include evil as well. Tiantai Buddhism, which is Tendai Buddhism, Japanese call it Tendai Buddhism, proclaims the evil inherent in Buddha nature, that's in quotes, as its most distinctive doctrine. So evil is inherent in Buddha nature, the full comprehension of which it is claimed is alone able to open up a realization of the deepest truths of Buddhist thought, practice, and experience. Awareness allows us to be more and do more by allowing all things to be and do more fully what they are being and doing. It is neither active nor passive, neither controlling things nor being controlled by them. It is the middle way, and it is here that we can trace the seeds of the Tiantai conception of overcoming our evil and suffering through the fuller realization of our evil and suffering. Greater awareness, a more robust presence in our experience, is at once an overcoming and a full allowing. It is only when evil and suffering are experienced as occurring everywhere and at all times that they are fully and eternally overcome. And later on we get this passage in which he's talking about a chapter in the Lotus Sutra which features Devadatta. So we're joining the chapter in progress. Devadatta is a sort of Judas figure of Buddhism, the Buddha's cousin who repeatedly attempted to assassinate him, creating a rival monastic group and shedding the Buddha's blood. Devadatta is the figure of the extremist evil in Buddhism, guilty of the most heinous sins. In this chapter of the Lotus Sutra, we are told that long, long ago, Devadatta was actually the present Buddha's teacher. In fact, it is solely because of the good spiritual friendship of Devadatta that the Buddha was able to attain enlightenment and Buddhahood. What is more, Devadatta, who in the present is the purest evil in both thought and deed, will become a Buddha in the future, just like all the other people discussed in the sutra. Once again, we have a present evil recontextualized by a Buddhific past and a Buddhific future, and thus given a new significance. Even evil, the most extreme contrast to Buddhahood, is a cause of Buddhahood, an expression of Buddhahood, and an aspect of Buddhahood. Now, after reading this, I was kind of led down the Brooke A. Zipporin rabbit hole and came across an article titled Hitler, the Holocaust, and the Tiantai Doctrine of Evil as the Good, in which Professor Zipporin, or however we pronounce it, is rebutting some kind of he seems to be having an argument with David Loy, another Buddhist author, who is confused by some of what Professor Zipporin is saying about the Tendai doctrine that I just was trying to discuss about evil as the good. And like the person I was dealing with on Twitter, brings up the Hitler argument. And Professor Zipporin gives this very convoluted and philosophically interesting and difficult to follow argument about how you can recontextualize even Hitler as good, but before you go canceling Professor Zipporin and me for even bringing him up, it does not it doesn't negate the sort of conventional understanding of good and evil. So it's not trying to say that Hitler, as the genocidal maniac who killed 6 million Jews and all that, is somehow good. It's saying you have to completely kind of recontextualize and blah, blah, blah. And it's really, really difficult, and I'm not even going to attempt to summarize what he says in the article. I'll try to leave a link down below in the YouTube description section if I can find the article again. What was interesting to me is it's the same argument he uses to talk about Hitler's the argument I used to talk about suicide in an article that I wrote about 10 or 15 years ago that I believe I first put up on Suicide Girls when I was writing for the Suicide Girls website, and then I think I also gave it to Tricycle Magazine, and it might still be up on Tricycle Magazine's website, I'm not sure. And I believe it was called something like The Right Way to Kill Yourself. So what I did in that article, I can explain better than I can try to explain what Professor Zipporin did in his article. What I did there was, in the late 80s, early 90s, I'm not sure exactly what year it was, I was going through a period of really, really deep depression and having really intense thoughts of suicide, and I very nearly killed myself. I was about to go and do it, and turned away at the last minute from doing it. But at that moment, I made a decision which at the time I did not realize was very much a Tendai Buddhist kind of decision, which is that I decided there was a different way to kill myself. I didn't have to kill myself by destroying my physical body. I would kill myself by making a complete break with the life that I had been living up until that point. I was going to just completely cut it off, as if I was going to die, but I was going to do it in a way that, wouldn't make my mom and dad cry. My mom and dad were still alive at the time, or make everybody depressed, because I had known a person. I didn't even know this guy very well, but I knew a guy who had killed himself about 10 years before this happened to me, and I was still grieving over that. And like I said, I barely even knew this guy, but so I didn't want to become that to all of my friends and acquaintances. So I decided there was another way, and I didn't know at the time that I made this decision how I was going to do that, but what ended up happening is I ended up moving to Japan and taking a job as an English teacher in Japan. So moving to Japan was a way of just cutting off everything in my life up until that moment. There was no well, I guess the internet existed in the early 90s, but it was hard to get access to. So it wasn't like it is today. So I was really isolated from friends and family, but I wasn't dead. So I could still write to my mom and dad and call them and send them letters and, see them every once in a while by flying back home. So there was no necessity for them to grieve my loss forever. But I cut off my whole life and I made a complete change, and that worked. It accomplished everything I wanted to do by killing myself without actually killing myself. And like I say, I can't explain and try to compress what Professor Zipperin says in his article about Hitler and the Holocaust, but he does a kind of move like that, which does not, fear not. He's not trying to say that, like Kanye West is trying to say, that Hitler was actually a good guy and that the Holocaust was actually a good thing, or that it never happened, or any kind of nonsense like that. But he's trying to say that you change the thing by saying do it in a different way. If you are bent on killing yourself, kill yourself in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. And he makes some moves like that, and you can read the article if you want to read the article. But reading this and reading the stuff about Tendai Buddhism is really fascinating. And it also gives me a hint as to why Dogen left Tendai Buddhism. He never repudiates Tendai Buddhism, and reading this book, I can see how a lot of the Tendai Buddhist ideas informed his work and his philosophy in later days. But I can see why he left it, because it's very heady. It's very, you gotta kind of live up in your head and try to kind of think these through, and it's very convoluted and stuff. Whereas Zen is very direct. And Zen doesn't even try to make these convoluted philosophical arguments of how evil can be good and all this stuff. It just says, look, follow the precepts, be a good person, and do the right thing. And it doesn't even try to tell you, how evil can be good and all this. Because I think that kind of stuff is a bit dangerous. Because it can end up confusing people. When I look at, people like Charles Manson, for example. Charles Manson was real into esoteric Indian philosophies and Buddhist and Hindu stuff, and so was Hitler, for example. And then they got it wrong. They would come across stuff, probably from Tendai Buddhism and other sorts of, Tantric Buddhism, this esoteric Buddhist stuff, and some of the Hindu stuff that's very, that tries to recontextualize evil and stuff like that. And they would totally misunderstand it, and they would start to think evil is good and white is black and like all that stuff. And I feel like the Zen path is a lot better, because it just kind of goes, yeah, forget all of that. You don't have to get up in your head about that and try to figure it out. Just do the right thing, follow the precepts, do the good, and don't do evil. That's it. I mean, that's what Dogen kind of comes down on in. I explain that very thoroughly? I don't know. I try to explain it very thoroughly in my book, Don't Be a Jerk, Dogen's idea that the real essence of Buddhism is just don't be a jerk. Just do the right thing. Don't do the wrong thing. So there you go. Tried to make that short. Ended up making it much too long. I hope you managed to stay with me for that. And I will play you out with a song, one of my favorite punk rock songs of all time. It's by the Angry Samoans. It's called They Saved Hitler's Weenie. I might get in trouble on YouTube if I said the actual word that they say. Hopefully they won't pick it up if it's in a song. So here it is. They saved Hitler's weenie for you. Here's the song. Oh, by the way, before I play the song, you can donate to me at the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living, so I appreciate your support. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. Okay, now here is the song. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye. Dessen wollen wir nun laut gedenken. Unsere feine Heimat, unser feines deutsches Reich. Hey Ziggy, what'd you think of that song? Did you like that song? You thought it was rocking? You didn't like that song very much? Kept you awake? Okay, I'll let you sleep. See you later, Ziggy. Bye.